I am Elsa, 34 years old, and I have spent my life watching my twin brother Ethan get handed everything while I work twice as hard for half the recognition. We grew up sharing DNA birthdays in a room, but never our parents' equal love. When Ethan announced his revolutionary business idea, my parents gave him $400,000 without hesitation. When I needed help, they told me to figure it out myself. The fallout after his inevitable failure, it brought me a satisfaction so sweet I can still taste it today. Before I share my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, hit that like button and subscribe to know you are not alone in this journey. Growing up in Brookline, an affluent suburb of Boston, my twin brother Ethan and I lived in a beautiful colonial home with a perfectly manicured lawn. Our father James was a successful financial advisor at a prestigious firm, while our mother Diana ran her interior design business from home. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family, but inside our home, a clear hierarchy had been established since we were small. Even in my earliest memories, I can recall the subtle differences in how my parents treated us. When Ethan would build block towers that toppled over, my parents would clap and call him an innovative architect. When I would carefully construct stable structures, they would simply nod and say good job before turning their attention back to my brother. This pattern continued throughout elementary school. I still remember my third-grade science project on plant growth. I had meticulously measured and recorded data for weeks, creating detailed charts showing how different light conditions affected seedling development. The night before the science fair, I found my father in the basement helping Ethan glue plastic dinosaurs onto cardboard for his last-minute project on why dinosaurs became extinct, a topic he had chosen the day before. My project received the highest marks from the teachers, but my parents barely looked at it at the science fair. They spent the entire evening standing beside Ethan as he described his dinosaur scene to everyone who passed by. That night at dinner, my father raised his glass in a toast to our little paleontologist and his incredible imagination. My straight A report card that came home that same week was met with, "This is what we expect from you, Elsa." As we moved into middle school, the divide grew more pronounced. My achievements were treated as expected obligations, while Ethan's mediocre performances were celebrated as signs of his unique approach to life. When I brought home perfect scores, my mother would smile and say, "That is nice, dear," before asking Ethan about his C+ English essay that showed such creativity. I learned early on that to receive any attention in our household, I needed to be self-sufficient and exceptional. My brother, on the other hand, was taught that his mere existence was extraordinary. Ethan developed a charismatic personality and an unwavering confidence that everything he touched would turn to gold because in our parents' eyes, it already had. Despite the unbalanced dynamic, I loved my brother. We shared secrets, built forts in the backyard, and protected each other from neighborhood bullies. When it was just the two of us, away from our parents' disparate treatment, we were simply siblings who enjoyed each other's company. This made the inequity all the more confusing. I could never quite bring myself to resent him entirely, even as I watched him receive the love and support I desperately craved. High school widened the gulf between us. I threw myself into academics, joining the debate team, student government, and volunteering at the local hospital. Ethan became the social butterfly, playing on sports teams, but never excelling, starting bands that practiced twice before dissolving and dating popular girls who adored his easygoing charm. My parents attended every one of Ethan's football games, even though he spent most of the time on the bench. They would cheer wildly on the rare occasions he got to play. Meanwhile, I won the state debate championship with no one in the audience to celebrate with me. When I called home with the news, my mother said, "That is wonderful, honey, but we have to go. Ethan is having a small gathering for making it to football playoffs." The team had made it to playoffs. Ethan had contributed almost nothing to that achievement. Each missed piano recital, each academic award ceremony they skipped, each achievement met with cursory acknowledgement, built a wall within me. I learned to congratulate myself, to find pride in my accomplishments without external validation. I became fiercely independent out of necessity, while Ethan grew increasingly dependent on our parents' praise and support. By senior year, when college applications began, I had already resigned myself to creating my own path. I applied for every scholarship I could find and spent weekends writing application essays instead of going to parties. Ethan, meanwhile, relied on our father to hire a private college counselor who practically wrote his applications for him. The pattern was set, though. I could not have imagined then just how dramatically it would play out in our adult lives, or how the lessons in self reliance I was forced to learn would ultimately become my greatest strength. The college years marked a definitive fork in the road for Ethan and me. I was accepted to Johns Hopkins University with a substantial but not complete scholarship to study pre-med. My parents congratulated me, but immediately followed with concerns about the cost of the remaining tuition. "We have Ethan's education to think about too," my father reminded me during what should have been a celebration dinner. I took out student loans and worked 3 part-time jobs in the university library as a research assistant in the biology department and weekend shifts at a local cafe. My schedule was grueling, often studying until 2 or 3 in the morning after finishing work shifts. But I was determined to succeed, to prove my worth not just to my family, but to myself. Meanwhile, Ethan enrolled in a state college with a business program that had a decent reputation, but nothing like the prestige of Johns Hopkins. Despite his lower tuition costs, our parents covered his expenses entirely. They bought him a car so he could network properly, and gave him a monthly allowance for business clothes and social events. That was nearly as much as I made working all 3 of my jobs. My first semester break, I came home exhausted, but proud of my 4.0 GPA. At dinner, I tried to share stories about my advanced biology professor who had taken an interest in my work. My mother interrupted halfway through to ask Ethan about his new friends at college. He launched into stories of parties and campus antics, receiving rapt attention from both parents. "College is about more than just grades," my father said, squeezing Ethan's shoulder approvingly. "It is about building relationships that will serve you in the real world." The implication was clear. My academic focus was somehow missing the point of higher education, while Ethan's socializing was the correct approach. The fact that I was also building relationships with professors and fellow researchers apparently did not count in their estimation. By sophomore year, cracks were showing in Ethan's college experience. His grades were slipping, and he had changed his major twice already. During spring break of that year, he announced at dinner that he had a revelation. "College is for people who need a system to succeed," he declared. "But entrepreneurs make their own rules." My parents leaned forward in their chairs, captivated, as Ethan explained that he was dropping out to pursue his entrepreneurial destiny. He had no specific business plan, no concept to develop, just a vague notion that he was meant for something greater than formal education. Rather than expressing concern, my parents were enthralled. "We always knew you would forge your own path," my mother said, eyes shining with pride. My father nodded solemnly, adding, "The greatest business minds often recognize when traditional routes are just slowing them down." I sat in stunned silence, imagining what their reaction would have been had I announced a plan to drop out. The double standard was so blatant it was almost comical. While Ethan moved back home and spent his days brainstorming business concepts, which seemed to involve a lot of video games and meeting friends for coffee, I continued my rigorous academic path. By junior year, I had co-authored a research paper on immunotherapy approaches that was published in a respected medical journal. I sent a copy to my parents, who responded with a brief congratulations text 3 days later. That same week, they took Ethan out to celebrate because he had finally narrowed down his business interests to the wellness industry, still with no concrete plans or actions. My senior year brought a cascade of achievements. I was accepted into a prestigious research program, awarded a grant for my work on cancer treatment delivery systems, and graduated summa cum laude. My parents did attend my graduation, but left immediately after the ceremony to get back home for what my mother called an important meeting for Ethan. I later learned this important meeting was simply Ethan pitching his latest idea to a friend of my father's who had a background in marketing. Nothing came of the meeting, but it was apparently more deserving of my parents' time than celebrating the completion of my degree. The one bright spot during these years was meeting Michael in my junior year. We met in an ethics class I was taking as an elective, and he was pursuing as part of his philosophy major. Michael truly saw me in a way no one in my family ever had. He listened when I spoke, celebrated my accomplishments without qualification, and never treated my ambitions as secondary to his own. When I brought Michael home to meet my family during senior year, he witnessed the dynamic firsthand. After a dinner where my parents spent 90 minutes discussing Ethan's potential business ideas and 5 minutes asking about my post-graduation plans, Michael squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "They have no idea what a star they have in you." His family was different. The first time I visited his parents' home in Pennsylvania, they had printed out my research paper and asked thoughtful questions about my work. His mother, a high school science teacher, had even annotated sections she found particularly interesting. His father, who ran a small construction company, told me he was proud of my accomplishments, not just as Michael's girlfriend, but as a young person making important contributions to medicine. That first visit with Michael's family was like walking into a warm room after being out in the cold for years. I had not realized just how starved for parental approval I had been until I experienced what it felt like to receive it from someone else's parents. After graduation, I was accepted into a competitive research position at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. When I told my parents about the opportunity, my mother's first response was to ask if I had considered nursing instead. "Research is such a cold field," she said. "You have always been so compassionate. Wouldn't you rather work directly with patients? And New York is so far away." The subtext was clear. A research career was too ambitious, too demanding, and would take me too far from home, where I could continue my role as the responsible, self-sufficient daughter who required minimal attention, while they focused on Ethan's journey. I took the position anyway. Michael moved to New York with me, finding work at a nonprofit focused on educational equity. We built a life together based on mutual respect and support, a healing counterbalance to the dynamic I had grown up with. What I did not know then was that the most stark example of my parents' favoritism was yet to come. The $400,000 moment happened 3 years after my college graduation. Michael and I had been living in New York, saving diligently for a down payment on an apartment while paying off my student loans. We were visiting my parents for Thanksgiving, and Ethan had requested a special family dinner the night before the holiday to share some news. We gathered in my parents' dining room, the table set with the good china and candles, a level of formality usually reserved for Christmas dinner. Ethan arrived last, making an entrance with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. Dressed in what I now recognize was his attempt at startup CEO attire, dark jeans, a blazer, and a button-down shirt with no tie. "I have been working on something revolutionary," he announced once we were all seated. He pulled out his portfolio with a flourish, opening it to reveal a series of glossy printed pages. "This is going to disrupt the entire wellness industry." The concept, as far as I could understand it, was an app that would combine dietary advice, exercise routines, meditation guidance, and social networking for holistic self-optimization. Nothing about it seemed particularly original. There were already dozens of similar apps on the market, but Ethan presented it as if he had invented the concept of wellness itself. "I call it Transcend," he said, his voice reverent, "because it helps people transcend their limitations and become their best selves." My parents were enraptured. My mother actually dabbed at tears as Ethan described features that already existed in numerous other applications. My father nodded solemnly, as if witnessing the second coming of Steve Jobs. When Ethan finished his presentation, he closed his portfolio and looked around the table expectantly. "I need seed funding to get this off the ground. I have run the numbers, and I need $400,000 to build the app, rent office space, hire a small team, and launch a marketing campaign." I nearly choked on my water. $400,000 was an astronomical sum, particularly for an unproven concept in an oversaturated market with no clear differentiation. I opened my mouth to ask some basic questions. Had he developed a business plan? Researched the competition? Created financial projections? But my father spoke first. "We believe in you, son," he said, reaching over to clasp Ethan's shoulder. "Your mother and I have discussed it, and we are prepared to make this investment in your future." My mother beamed. "We always knew you were destined for something special, Ethan. This could be the next big thing, like Facebook or Instagram." I sat in stunned silence as they discussed liquidating investments and possibly taking out a home equity line of credit to fund my brother's vague business idea. When I finally found my voice, I tried to inject some rationality into the conversation. Have you considered starting smaller? I suggested. Maybe build a prototype, test it with a focus group, and secure some external investment before going all in. Three pairs of eyes turned to me with identical expressions of annoyance. Not everyone takes the safe route, Elsa, Ethan said dismissively. Sometimes you have to go big or go home. My father frowned. This is the kind of opportunity that requires bold action. If we wait, someone else could beat Ethan to market. I was just suggesting some standard business practices, I said, feeling defensive. Even major startups usually begin with, not everyone can be a researcher hiding in a lab, my mother interrupted. Some people are visionaries who need to move quickly. Ethan has always had exceptional instincts. The conversation moved on, my concerns dismissed as the timid objections of someone who did not understand entrepreneurship or vision or risk-taking. By the end of dinner, my parents had committed to providing Ethan with the full amount he requested, with no apparent conditions metrics for success or repayment terms discussed. Just 3 weeks before this dinner, I had called my parents to ask if they might be willing to help with a portion of a down payment for an apartment in New York. Michael and I had found a place in a good school district, thinking ahead to our future family. We had saved almost 80% of what we needed, but were about $25,000 short of what would give us a competitive edge in the brutal New York real estate market. You need to figure it out yourself, Elsa, my father had told me. Real estate in New York is a money pit, and you have always been so good at managing on your own. We are not in a position to help right now. We need to be careful with our retirement planning. That conversation replayed in my mind as I watched them eagerly promise nearly $500,000 to Ethan for his half-baked business concept. The contrast was so stark, so undeniable, that it crystallized something I had always felt, but never fully acknowledged. I was not just less favored than my brother, I barely registered in my parents' considerations at all. Within a month, Ethan had rented a trendy office space in downtown Boston, with exposed brick walls and industrial lighting. He hired 3 friends as team members, with impressively vague titles like Culture Optimization Specialist and User Experience Visionary. He purchased top-of-the-line computers, ergonomic office furniture, a cold brew coffee system, and commissioned a custom neon sign of the company logo for the reception area, all before a single line of code had been written for the actual app. When I visited the office at my mother's insistent urging, I was struck by how much it looked like a movie set version of a startup, rather than an actual functioning business. Ethan gave me a tour, speaking enthusiastically about cultivating the right energy and building a brand experience, while saying almost nothing about product development timelines or marketing strategies. I tried one more time to offer some practical advice, suggesting he might consider a more modest office and putting more resources toward product development and market research. Ethan laughed and said I just did not get how startups worked. When I mentioned that most successful startups actually began in garages or apartments to minimize overhead, he dismissed me with a wave. That is old school thinking, Elsa. We are disrupting the paradigm here. I left that day with a sense of impending disaster so strong it was almost a physical weight on my chest. But I had learned long ago that my perspective was not welcome when it came to Ethan's ventures, so I focused my energy on my own life. Michael and I continued saving, found a smaller apartment that we could afford without help, and I threw myself into my research work, which was beginning to gain recognition in the field. Little did I know that Ethan's business failure would soon become the catalyst for one of the most painful and ultimately liberating chapters of our family story. The warning signs of Ethan's business collapse appeared almost immediately, though my parents refused to see them. 6 months into the venture, Transcend had already pivoted 3 times from its original concept. What began as a wellness app transformed into a revolutionary fitness platform, then a mindfulness marketplace, and finally a social network for personal development enthusiasts. Each shift came with new expenses, rebranding different developers, and altered marketing strategies. During monthly family dinners, Ethan would report these changes as exciting evolutions, rather than concerning indications of a floundering business. "We are being agile," he would explain using startup jargon he had clearly picked up from podcasts. The greatest companies pivot constantly based on market feedback. The problem was there was no market feedback because there was no product. After 6 months and nearly $200,000 spent, Transcend existed only as a sleek website promising that the app was coming soon and a collection of branded merchandise that Ethan had commissioned for advance marketing. My attempts to ask gentle questions about timelines and development progress were met with defensiveness from Ethan and protective interference from my parents. Not everyone understands the creative process of building a revolutionary business, my mother would say, patting Ethan's hand supportively. Some ventures need time to find their perfect expression. Meanwhile, my own career was flourishing. I had been promoted to lead researcher on a promising immunotherapy project and had published several well-received papers. Michael and I had settled into our apartment in Brooklyn, making it a warm, inviting home. We got married in a small ceremony at a botanical garden with Michael's family in full attendance. And predictably, my parents arriving late and leaving early because Ethan had scheduled an emergency investor meeting the same evening. The investor meeting, I later learned, was with my father's golfing buddy, who had no intention of investing but had agreed to hear the kid out as a favor. 9 months into Transcend's journey, my father called me with what he termed a small request. He and my mother were considering remortgaging their home to provide Ethan with additional funding, as the initial investment was running low due to unexpected development costs. Before proceeding, my father wanted my opinion on current interest rates and whether I thought the housing market was stable. I was stunned, not by the request for financial advice. I had always been the practical one they turned to for such matters, but by the revelation that they were considering putting their home at risk for Ethan's clearly failing business. "Dad," I said carefully, "before you take such a significant step, have you seen any concrete progress on the app? Do they have a beta version user testing results? Any revenue projections based on actual data?" There was a pause. "Ethan says they are in a critical development phase," he replied, his voice defensive. "These things take time and additional investment. The important innovations always look like mistakes until they succeed. But are you being shown any evidence of progress?" I persisted. "Any tangible product or solid business metrics?" "You have always been so rigid in your thinking, Elsa," he said, his tone hardening. "Not everything can be measured in your scientific way. Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith in people with vision." The conversation ended shortly after, with my father clearly disappointed by my failure to enthusiastically endorse their plan to further finance Ethan's business. I hung up feeling a familiar mixture of frustration, hurt, and resignation. That night I confided in Michael about my concerns. "They are going to lose everything," I said, tears welling up despite my efforts to maintain composure. "And they cannot even see it happening." Michael held me as I cried, not offering platitudes or solutions, just the comfort of his steady presence. "Whatever happens," he said after my tears had subsided, "we will handle it together, but you cannot save people who do not want to be saved." 2 weeks later, we received an invitation to a special family dinner to celebrate Transcend's exciting new phase. Upon arriving at my parents' home, I immediately noticed subtle signs of financial strain. The house was cooler than usual. They were clearly conserving heating costs. The dinner was simpler than their typical fare, and I spotted past due notices partially hidden beneath a stack of magazines on the hallway console. During dinner, Ethan announced that Transcend was preparing for a soft launch of its beta version, but needed one final round of funding to complete development. My parents beamed with pride as he spoke, while I noticed the new creases of worry around my father's eyes, and the way my mother's hands trembled slightly as she served the food. After Ethan finished his practice speech, my father cleared his throat and announced that they had secured the additional funding by taking out a second mortgage on their home. "We believe in Transcend," he said firmly. "And we believe in Ethan's vision." Something in me snapped. After years of biting my tongue of accepting the inequality of managing my expectations, I could not sit by and watch them financially ruin themselves. "This has to stop," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Ethan has spent nearly $500,000 with nothing to show for it. No product, no users, no revenue, not even a functioning prototype." You are throwing good money after bad, and you are putting your retirement and financial security at risk." The table fell silent. My mother looked as if I had slapped her. Ethan's face flushed with anger. My father stared at me in shock. "How dare you?" Ethan finally said, his voice shaking. "You have always been jealous of me. Just because you chose a safe, boring career path does not mean everyone has to live small like you." "Elsa," my mother interjected, her voice trembling, "I cannot believe you would attack your brother like this. He is pursuing his dreams, taking risks to build something meaningful. Just because you do not understand his vision. This is not about vision." I interrupted, my calm finally breaking. "This is about basic business sense. Has anyone here seen a working version of this app? Has Ethan shown you any evidence that the money you have given him has produced anything tangible?" My father's expression hardened. "You have always been so critical, so unwilling to support your brother. We expected more loyalty from you, Elsa." "Loyalty?" I repeated, incredulous. "I have spent my entire life watching you give Ethan every advantage, every opportunity, every benefit of the doubt while I worked and saved and figured things out for myself. When I asked for help with a down payment, a fraction of what you have given Ethan, I was told to figure it out myself. And now you are talking to me about loyalty." "That was different," my father said dismissively. "You have always been capable of managing on your own. Ethan is building something that could change the world." "He is building nothing," I said, rising from my chair. "And you are going to lose everything supporting his fantasy." As I reached for my coat, my mother called after me, "You are just jealous of Ethan's vision and courage. You have always played it safe." I turned back one last time. "When this all comes crashing down, and it will do not come asking me to bail you out, I will not set myself on fire to keep you warm after you have given all your matches to Ethan." I left that night with a strange mixture of emotions, the pain of the final rupture, but also the relief of finally speaking my truth. On the drive home, Michael reached over and squeezed my hand. "I am proud of you," he said simply. I had no idea then just how prophetic my words would prove to be, or how soon the collapse would come. The complete implosion of Ethan's business took just 18 months from the initial investment. Transcend never made it past a buggy beta version that crashed constantly and lacked most of the features Ethan had grandly promised. The handful of test users, recruited mostly friends and family, provided feedback that was diplomatically described as mixed, but was in reality overwhelmingly negative. By the end, Ethan had burned through not only the initial $400,000, but also the additional $250,000 from my parents' second mortgage. $650,000 gone. Nothing to show for it, but an unfinished app, a broken lease on an expensive office space, and a storage unit full of branded merchandise for a product that would never exist. I learned about the final collapse, not from my family, but from my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, who called me one Saturday morning. "Have you spoken to your parents recently?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. I had not. After our confrontation at dinner 3 months earlier, communication had dwindled to terse text messages on birthdays and holidays. "They are in serious trouble, Elsa," Susan continued. "The bank is threatening foreclosure. Your father had to come out of semi-retirement and is trying to rebuild his client base, but it is going to take time. Your mother has closed her design business. They cannot afford to keep the office space. And Ethan," she paused, "Ethan has moved back home. He is not handling the failure well." I sat in stunned silence, absorbing the news. Despite having predicted this very outcome, hearing that it had actually come to pass brought me no joy. These were still my parents, still my brother, and knowing they were suffering was not the vindication I might have once imagined it would be. "Are they asking for help?" I finally asked, already knowing the answer. "Not directly," Susan replied. "But your mother has mentioned several times how stable your career is, how well you and Michael are doing. I think they are hoping you will offer." After hanging up, I discussed the situation with Michael. As always, he was my anchor, listening without judgment and offering perspective without pressure. "What do you want to do?" he asked after I had laid out everything Susan told me. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Honestly, part of me wants to let them figure it out themselves, give them a taste of what they have always expected from me. But another part, they are still my parents, Michael. He nodded, understanding. Whatever you decide, I am with you. But remember what you said to them about not setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. That wasn't just angry words, it was wisdom. 3 days later, my phone rang with my mother's number. This was unusual. Most of our limited communication happened via text. I braced myself and answered. Elsa. My mother's voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. Do you have a moment to talk? Of course, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Things have been difficult. She began, choosing her words carefully. The business, it did not work out as we had hoped. We are facing some financial challenges. I waited, not filling the silence. Your father and I were wondering, she continued, if perhaps you and Michael might be able to help out temporarily, just until we get back on our feet. Maybe a loan to help with the mortgage payments while your father rebuilds his client base. Despite Susan's warning hearing, the request directly from my mother sent a wave of complex emotions through me. Anger hurt vindication, and a strange, sad pity. What happened with all the money you invested in Ethan's business? I asked, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear her acknowledge it. It is gone, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The app never launched properly. There were complications, technical issues. Ethan says the developers did not understand his vision. Of course he did. Ethan had never taken responsibility for a failure in his life. Why would this massive one be any different? And where is Ethan now? I pressed. He is staying with us while he regroups, she replied. He is having a hard time, Elsa. This was his dream. I took a deep breath, centering myself. Mom, I want to be very clear. I cannot and will not provide financial support in this situation. Dad told me to figure it out myself when I needed help with a down payment. Now it is your turn to figure it out yourselves. But this is different, she protested, her voice rising. We are talking about your parents losing their home. How can you be so cold? The same way you both were cold when you dismissed every accomplishment I ever achieved while celebrating Ethan's most basic efforts. I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. The same way you were cold when you gave him hundreds of thousands of dollars, but could not spare a fraction of that to help me. The same way you were cold when you accused me of jealousy for pointing out the obvious flaws in his business plan. I cannot believe you are bringing up old grievances at a time like this, my mother said, her tone shifting from pleading to indignant. They are not old grievances, Mom. They are the direct causes of your current situation. You chose to invest everything in Ethan and nothing in me. That was your decision, and now you are living with the consequences. The line went quiet for several seconds. When my mother spoke again, her voice was ice. I never thought you could be this heartless. We are family. Yes, we are, I agreed, and that cuts both ways. Good luck, Mom. I mean that sincerely. I ended the call feeling strangely calm. For perhaps the first time in my life, I had set a boundary with my family and held it firm despite the emotional pressure. It was both terrifying and liberating. 2 days later, Ethan showed up at our apartment unannounced. When I opened the door, he pushed past me into the living room, his face flushed with anger. How can you just abandon our parents like this? He demanded without preamble. They gave everything for us, and now when they need help, you turn your back. Michael, who had been reading in the bedroom, emerged at the sound of the commotion. He positioned himself nearby, not interfering but present in case the situation escalated. They did not give everything for us, Ethan, I corrected him. They gave everything for you, and now they have nothing left because of it. That is not fair, he snapped. They believed in me. It is not my fault the tech team could not execute my vision properly. Always someone else's fault, never his. The pattern was so predictable it would have been comical if it were not destroying our family. $650,000, Ethan, I said quietly. That is what they gave you to pursue your vision. When I asked for help with a $25,000 down payment, I was told to figure it out myself. Can you honestly tell me you do not see the imbalance there? This is different, he insisted, echoing our mother. My business could have changed everything for all of us. It was an investment in our family's future. No, I countered. It was an investment in your ego. You never had a viable business plan. You never had a unique concept. You had buzzwords and grandiose promises, and they bought into it because they have always seen you through rose-colored glasses. So this is punishment, he demanded. You are letting them lose their house to teach them a lesson. I shook my head. This is not punishment, Ethan. This is reality. Actions have consequences. They chose to bet everything on you, and you lost their bet. Now you all need to deal with the results of those choices. His face contorted with rage. You always thought you were better than me with your fancy degree and your research job. Always the perfect daughter. Always looking down on me. I never looked down on you, Ethan. I just saw you clearly. I saw how our parents set you up for this failure by never requiring you to earn anything or face any consequences. And I will not participate in continuing that cycle. You need to step up for your family, he shouted, taking a step toward me. Michael moved forward, then his presence calm but unmistakably protective. I think it is time for you to leave, Ethan. My brother looked from Michael to me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. So that is it. You are choosing your husband over your blood family. I am choosing responsibility over enablement, I corrected him. I am choosing reality over fantasy. And yes, I am choosing the person who has always supported me over the people who never did. You will regret this, Ethan hissed as he moved toward the door. When they lose everything, it will be on you. No, I said firmly. It will be on all of you. Goodbye, Ethan. As I closed the door behind him, I felt an unexpected wave of something like grief wash over me. Not for the loss of money or property, but for the family relationships that might have been, if only the dynamics had been different. Michael wrapped his arms around me as I leaned against the closed door. You okay? He murmured into my hair. I nodded slowly. I think I finally am. In the following weeks, my parents attempted to leverage extended family members to pressure me into helping them. Aunt Susan called again, as did two uncles and even my grandmother. Each time I calmly explained my position and refused to be swayed by guilt or emotional manipulation. It was a painful period of holding boundaries I had never before had the courage to maintain. But with each successful defense of those boundaries, I grew stronger and more certain that I was breaking a destructive pattern that had defined my entire life. The fallout was painful, but there was a certain sweetness in finally standing my ground, in refusing to be the safety net for people who had never been mine. The first sign of genuine change came 6 months after Ethan's failed business and my refusal to bail out my parents. My phone rang on a Wednesday evening as I was preparing dinner. Seeing my father's number, I hesitated before answering, bracing myself for another attempt at emotional manipulation. "Hello, Dad," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Elsa," he replied, his voice sounding different, older, more subdued. "I was wondering if you might be willing to meet me for coffee next time you're in Boston. Or I could come to New York if that is easier for you." The lack of immediate request or accusation caught me off guard. "I could come to Boston this weekend," I found myself saying. "Michael and I were thinking of visiting his cousin in Cambridge anyway." We arranged to meet at a cafe near the Boston Public Garden on Saturday morning. When I arrived, I almost did not recognize my father. In just 6 months, he seemed to have aged years. His shoulders were slightly stooped, his hair noticeably grayer. He was dressed in a simple button-down shirt, rather than the designer clothes he had always favored. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as I sat across from him. "I know you had every reason to refuse." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. He wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, staring down into it, as if gathering courage. "I owe you an apology, Elsa. Many apologies, actually." This was so unexpected that I found myself momentarily speechless. "I have had a lot of time to reflect these past months," he continued. "Losing nearly everything has a way of clarifying what matters and what doesn't. And it has forced me to confront some hard truths about myself as a father." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I failed you. From the time you and Ethan were children, I treated you differently. I expected more from you and gave you less in return. I took your accomplishments for granted while celebrating Ethan's smallest efforts. It was unfair, and it was wrong. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back, not wanting to break the moment. When you warned us about Ethan's business, we should have listened, he continued. You were right about everything. The concept wasn't original. There was no solid plan. It was all smoke and mirrors, and we wanted so badly to believe in it that we ignored all the warning signs. He took a shaky breath. We've lost the house. We're living in a 2-bedroom apartment now. Your mother has gone back to work at a local design firm as an employee, not an owner. I've rebuilt some of my client base, but at my age, it's slower going than I'd hoped. And Ethan? I asked, almost afraid of the answer. My father's expression tightened. That's complicated. He stayed with us for a while, but there was tension. He still blames the developers, the market, the investors, who wouldn't come on board everyone but himself. He's working at a friend's marketing firm now, but he's still talking about his next big idea. Some patterns are hard to break, I observed quietly. My father nodded. Your mother still makes excuses for him. That's been a source of conflict between us. This situation has forced us to confront not just our financial mistakes, but our parenting ones as well. He reached across the table tentatively, not quite touching my hand, but leaving his own palm up in invitation. I don't expect forgiveness, Elsa. What we did over so many years isn't something that can be erased with one conversation. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see you. And I am deeply, profoundly sorry. I placed my hand in his, feeling the familiar roughness of his palm against mine. Thank you for saying that, Dad. It means a lot to hear it. We talked for nearly 3 hours that morning. Really talked perhaps for the first time in our lives. He asked about my research, listening attentively as I explained the immunotherapy project I was leading. He told me about the humbling experience of downsizing, of starting over financially in his 60s. There were difficult moments and painful acknowledgments, but also a new honesty between us that felt like the beginning of healing. As we were preparing to leave, he handed me a small wrapped package. This isn't much, Va, he said, but I wanted you to have it. Inside was a framed copy of the front page of the scientific journal where my latest research had been published. He had gone to the trouble of finding it, purchasing it, and having it professionally framed. I'm proud of you, Elsa, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I should have told you that every day of your life. 2 weeks after my meeting with my father, he arranged what he called a family reconciliation dinner at their new apartment. The space was modest, but clean and bright, with simple furniture that bore no resemblance to the expensive pieces that had filled their former home. My mother was more reserved than my father had been, her pride still wounded by their financial collapse, and my refusal to rescue them. But there was a new humility in her manner as she served the simple meal she had prepared. Your father tells me you're leading an important research project now, she said as we ate, making an evident effort to show interest. Yes, I replied, describing my work briefly, watching her face for the glazed expression I was accustomed to seeing whenever I discussed my career. To my surprise, she asked several follow-up questions that suggested she was genuinely listening. That sounds incredibly important, she said when I finished. You always were brilliant. I should have paid more attention to that. It wasn't a direct apology like my father's, but from my mother, who had always redirected conversations away from my achievements, it was a significant acknowledgement. Ethan did not attend the dinner, having refused the invitation. He's still angry, my father explained, at us, at the world, at you, but mostly I think at himself, though he'd never admit it. Over the following months, my relationship with my parents underwent a careful reconstruction. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns threatened to reemerge, when my mother would slip into making excuses for Ethan, or when the inequality of their treatment would become apparent in small ways. But there was also genuine effort on their part, particularly from my father, to rebuild our relationship on more equal footing. I maintained firm boundaries, refusing to be drawn into discussions about financially supporting them, but offering emotional support and practical advice as they rebuilt their lives. Michael was my steadfast partner through it all, gently reminding me when I was in danger of falling back into old patterns of seeking approval or accepting less than I deserved. Ethan remained the wild card in our family equation. He avoided me entirely for nearly a year, sending Christmas and birthday cards with impersonal messages clearly written by whatever store had sold him the card. He maintained sporadic contact with our parents, but moved out of Boston to Providence for a job at a marketing firm, creating geographical distance to match the emotional distance that had grown between him and the family. The sweetest part of the aftermath wasn't watching my parents struggle or seeing Ethan face consequences. It was discovering my own power to set boundaries and hold to them to demand the respect I deserved, and to build a life based on mutual support and genuine recognition with Michael and his family, with my colleagues, and increasingly with my father. The collapse of Ethan's business and my parents' financial security was a tragedy of their own making. But from that collapse emerged the possibility of a new family dynamic, one built on hard-won truth rather than comfortable delusion. 2 years after the collapse of Transcend and my parents' financial downfall, I stood at a podium in a hotel ballroom in Chicago, accepting a prestigious award for my team's breakthrough in targeted immunotherapy delivery systems. Our research had shown promising results in early clinical trials, potentially offering new hope for patients with certain aggressive cancers. As I delivered my acceptance speech, I scanned the audience and found my father and mother seated near the front, both beaming with genuine pride. Next to them sat Michael, who gave me a subtle thumbs up as our eyes met. Their presence at this ceremony was significant, not just because they had traveled from Boston to attend, but because they had rearranged important commitments to be there. My father had rescheduled client meetings, and my mother had taken time off from her job at the design firm, where she now worked as a senior consultant rather than owner. 2 years earlier, they would have found a reason why Ethan's needs took precedence over my professional recognition. The fact that they were here fully present and openly proud represented a profound shift in our family dynamic. After the ceremony, we gathered for dinner at a restaurant Michael had selected for the celebration. As we were seated, my father raised his glass. "To Elsa," he said, his voice carrying genuine emotion, "whose brilliance, dedication, and integrity have made a real difference in the world. We could not be prouder of you." My mother nodded, adding, "Your work is going to help so many people, sweetheart. What you have accomplished is truly remarkable." The sincerity in their words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. This was the recognition I had craved throughout my childhood and early adulthood, not exaggerated or performative praise, but genuine acknowledgement of my worth and contribution. During dinner, my father updated me on their continuing financial recovery. "We will never be back where we were," he admitted without self-pity. "But we are stable now. Your mother's design expertise is valued at her firm, and I have rebuilt about half my former client base. We are even putting a little aside each month for eventual retirement." My mother added, "The apartment has started to feel like home. It is actually easier to maintain than that big house was. And your father and I have reconnected in ways we had not in years. Sometimes I think losing everything was what we needed to find what matters." "And Ethan?" I asked. We had established a tentative arm's-length relationship over the past year, exchanging occasional text messages and meeting once for an awkward lunch when he visited New York for a work conference. My parents exchanged glances. "He is doing better," my mother said cautiously. "He has stayed at the marketing firm for over a year now, his longest consistent employment ever. His boss apparently values his creativity, but has established clear boundaries about follow-through and accountability. He moved into his own apartment last month," my father added. "No roommates paying his own rent. That is significant progress for him." "He asks about you sometimes," my mother ventured. "I think he misses his twin more than he is willing to admit." I nodded, neither committing to nor rejecting the implied suggestion that I might reach out to him. Ethan and I had a long journey ahead if we were ever to rebuild a meaningful relationship. The years of inequality had created wounds that would take more than polite text messages to heal. Later that evening, back in our hotel room, Michael and I discussed the remarkable evolution of my relationship with my parents. "They really are trying," he observed as he loosened his tie. I could see it in everything, the way they listened to you, the questions they asked, how they made sure to include me in the conversation. I nodded, slipping off my heels and sinking onto the edge of the bed. It is bittersweet. I am grateful for the change, but I cannot help wondering who we all might have been if this had been our dynamic from the beginning. Michael sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. That is natural. You are mourning the relationship you should have had all along. The strangest part, I confessed, is that despite everything, I still feel a responsibility toward Ethan. He is my twin. We shared a womb, a room, a childhood. Even with all the damage done by our parents' favoritism, that bond never completely breaks. You can hold space for that bond without compromising your boundaries, Michael reminded me. Reconciliation doesn't have to mean returning to old patterns. I leaned against him, drawing strength from his steadfast presence. You know what I realized today? The sweetest part of this whole journey wasn't seeing them lose everything or being proved right. It was finding my own voice and using it standing firm in my worth, even when they couldn't see it. 3 months after the award ceremony, I discovered I was pregnant. Michael and I had been trying for about a year, and the news brought a mixture of joy and trepidation. As we prepared for parenthood, I found myself reflecting deeply on the family patterns I'd experienced and those I wanted to create for our child. What if we have twins? I asked Michael one night, as we lay in bed, my hand resting on my still flat stomach. What if we unconsciously favor one over the other? He propped himself up on one elbow, looking at me seriously. We will be vigilant against it. We will check each other. And most importantly, we will listen if our children tell us they feel unseen or unheard. I want them to know they are valuable for who they are, not for what they achieve, I said. I do not want them to experience the conditional love I grew up with. They will not, Michael promised. They will be loved completely for exactly who they are. When we announced the pregnancy to my parents, their genuine excitement was another step in our healing journey. My mother immediately began collecting ideas for the nursery design, while my father started researching college savings plans, practical ways of showing support that acknowledged the future without trying to control it. Ethan's response to the news came as a surprise. He sent a handwritten card, not a store-bought one with his signature, but a proper note expressing congratulations and a hesitant inquiry about whether he might be involved in his niece or nephew's life. I called him after receiving it, our first phone conversation in nearly 2 years. I would like you to be part of the baby's life, I told him, but it needs to be a healthy involvement. I am working on myself, he said, a new humility in his voice that I had never heard before. Therapy, actually. Dad suggested it, and for once I took his advice. That is good to hear, I said, meaning it. I have been thinking a lot about us, he continued, about how different things could have been if Mom and Dad had not, well, if they had treated us equally. I did not see it for a long time, Elsa. I really did not. But losing everything forced me to see a lot of things differently. It was not a complete acknowledgement or apology, but it was a start, a crack in the armor of entitlement he had worn his entire life. Maybe we could have lunch next time you are in New York, I offered, or I could meet you halfway somewhere. I would like that, he said. Then after a pause, I am proud of you, you know. Your research, your award, all of it. You always were the smart one. We are both smart, I replied, just in different ways. As I hung up, I felt a sense of cautious hope. Not that my family would ever be perfect or that the years of imbalance could be erased, but that we might build something new from the ashes of what had fallen apart. The journey from being the overlooked twin to the one whose achievements were finally recognized had been long and painful. The favoritism that had shaped my childhood had left scars that would never completely fade. But through it all, I had built resilience, self-reliance, and ultimately the strength to demand recognition on my own terms. The sweet taste of that hard-won victory was not in seeing my parents lose their financial security or watching my brother's business fail. It was in standing firmly in my own worth, regardless of whether anyone else could see it. It was in building a life with someone who recognized my value from the beginning. And it was in breaking the cycle of conditional love so that my own child would never question their place in my heart. As I placed a hand on my growing belly, I made a silent promise to my unborn child. You will be loved for exactly who you are, not for what you accomplish or how well you meet my expectations. Your worth will never be measured against a sibling or anyone else. You are already enough exactly as you are. That I realized was the lesson hidden within the painful journey my family had taken. True worth comes not from external validation or achievement, but from within. And the sweetest victory is not revenge or vindication, but becoming the person you were meant to be, despite the limitations of those who should have nurtured that person all along. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who could not see your worth? Share your story in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of self-discovery and family healing. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the greatest act of self-love is standing firm in your boundaries when others try to cross them.